everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well today. So, in this one, of course, as we mentioned before, with the winter storm that's ongoing or preparing to begin, I should say at this point. By the time this video goes up, it's probably going to be ongoing. We have a pretty notable winter threat over the Ohio Valley and parts of the Midwest, but the ice threat is really going to start to pick up later this evening over the Virginias and then heading into the Northeast here. So it's going to be pretty persistent freezing rainfall, and then of course snow on the back side, actually I would say the front side of this in this case. With that little warm layer that we have here where we're seeing these higher probabilities, this is of course freezing rain this time. Typically we use this for looking at snowfall, and we will, but the snowfall accumulation isn't going to be all that impressive with this storm. It's really not going to be the main story in this case here. Let me reset this real quick, but as you can see, if you look at snowfall probabilities of 4 inches of accumulation or greater, not a whole lot going on unless you're over towards the mountains here over the course of the next few days, and then those probabilities drop off. As we mentioned before, out towards the west, no real surprise, snowfall is going to be pretty significant over there in the mountains. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit in general, but also one other thing that we're going to be keeping an extra close eye on is this winter storm that's going to be preceding the one that we're about to deal with now. As you can see, there's very high probabilities of snowfall and ice accumulation, sleet accretion over here towards the northwest over the course of the next 4 to 7 days here. Then even a signal starts to pop up over here towards the mid-Atlantic as well, so that would include Washington, D.C., New York, Philly. All you guys need to be prepared. Winter storm looks like another winter storm is going to be following the current one, and you guys look like you are in line to be affected by this as well. So also with that, like I said before in the previous video, severe weather definitely also seems to be possible at this point, so definitely need to be keeping track of that as well. I'm going to go ahead and get into the model comparison here, and like I said, there is a lot to unpack here, so we're going to do the best that we can at this juncture. So we're going to start with the GFS here, kind of keep things rolling. We're going to watch winter storm number 1 come into play here. We'll see that move out, only to be followed by yet another coming in behind that. And by the time we get towards the 11th and the 12th, not only do we have the chance of winter weather, but it does look like severe weather could sneak its way back into the equation here. Now, one thing that I've made note of here is these two models, the GFS and the Euro, are not in the best of agreement with each other right now in regards to the severe weather threat. With winter weather, it's been relatively in good agreement, I would say. Timing is pretty similar, but I want you to pay attention over towards the southern part of the map here. Watch how things kind of pick up over here more so towards the 11th. As we get towards the 12th, things kind of drop off a bit, where if anything on the GFS for the 12th, the signal actually improves a bit more. See a couple of different areas of interest here. Depending on how this warm sector either advances or kind of retreats a little bit could also determine who gets what here. But one thing that I have made note of in either case, whether it's the 11th or 12th, is there is a very well amped up shortwave that pops up in either of these areas over here towards the Mississippi Delta and over towards the deep south. So like I said, it seems more and more likely that at some point in time in the deep south we can expect a chance for some stronger thunderstorms. I won't go as far as to say that this looks like a severe weather outbreak like some people I've seen online, but definitely something I'm going to be paying extra close attention to as we go forward. I'm going to move this back up to where the GFS time frame is as well, so we're at about 180 hours at this point. You can see that plenty of shower and storm activity also most likely be expected at this point. You always look for these little areas right here. I'm going to go ahead and circle that for you so you can see it. But these little areas here where you see the space in between the purples and the reds here, that is what you call diffluence. Usually when you see diffluence, there's something going on there. And since this is the warm sector right here based off the ridge that we have, this is going to be where we get our showers and thunderstorm activity here most likely. But if we were to see some of that in winter weather, in the cold sector, we might be looking at the chance for some winter weather here and there. But in any case, as we keep the ball rolling here, we're going to go with the GFS and continue on. You can see a couple of big troughs coming in after that point, around that 10-day time frame range. And this is where things kind of get interesting for the deep south here a bit. Now, I don't know how this cold air is going to set up here, but if it were to push a little bit further to the south, we could be talking about the Ohio Valley, Tennessee Valley starting to get into the action in regards to winter weather. Towards the deep south, right now, we're still looking like we're going to deal with cold rain at this juncture. However, the Euro shows a little bit more aggressive looking trough coming into play here. And the number that I usually look for, even though it doesn't always translate towards lower levels of the atmosphere, is the 540 line. That 540 line is still pretty far to the north, but with a trough like this, you can sometimes get that cold air to sneak further to the south. And you can kind of see that happen over here. There's that 540 line on the screen here. I'm not able to mark it on this screen for whatever reason. But in any case, if we keep this ball rolling here, you can see that, uh-oh, is my screen frozen? Okay, there it goes. But what you'll be able to make note of here is that with this trough and the cold air coming in, it does leave a little bit of a wild card scenario coming into play for this region here. So definitely need to keep an eye on that before all is said and done. This will be towards the 18th where we're watching that setup come into play here. As we go further along here, we start to warm right back up. And with that, kind of has a weird look here. I do think there could be opportunities here and there for some stronger frontal boundaries, maybe even more severe weather potential as we get towards the end of the month. But of course, when we make our model comparison here, we look at the GFS, we aren't seeing the same exact thing here. So like I said, a lot of questions exist as we go further into range here, but one thing that does seem to be certain is the opportunity for the deep south to maybe get more severe weather is possible there. All while in the meanwhile, out towards the west, we're actually going to be starting to deal with an increased chance of precipitation, especially towards the desert southwest. We'll run this loop all the way back to the very beginning here. What I want you to pay attention to is towards the far southwest, towards SoCal and beyond here. Notice the activity that we end up getting over here. We also have the Sierras getting into the action here, so there's going to be some significant snowfall over the next couple weeks there. And that's going to be a trend that pretty much continues throughout this entire run. It's not really going to be much of a break. Those are going to be looking like they're few and far in between. But look at the action that we end up getting over here as well. So hopefully this can manifest into a little bit of additional rainfall. Hopefully not too much at once, but with this region that's been having so much wildfire trouble, it'll be nice to see a little bit more relief coming their way too. Of course, by this point, this is when we start seeing that cold air make another march to the south here before all is said and done. So like I said, a lot of questions regarding areas a little further off to the east, but if you're out towards the southwest, there's potential for relief on the way. If you're over towards the northwest and the mountains, going to be a lot of winter weather coming your way. So let's go ahead and look at our temperature maps here. Not much has really changed with these since the last time we talked about them. It's been about a couple days at this juncture. So we can look at the Euro. We'll look at the Euro first here, and like I said, real point of interest at this point for me is really regarding severe weather more so than anything else. Because I mean, at the surface, even with the winter weather events where we're dealing with ice, the surface temperatures are going to pretty much be below freezing. But it's going to be towards the mid-levels where things kind of get interesting there. I would say right around the low-level jet range, which is about 1,000 feet above our heads, is where we're going to be slightly above freezing. A little bit later, I'll even try to show you a little sounding as to what was going on, as to why we have those increased chances here and there. One thing that I have made note of, though, and I've been keeping an eye on this as we've continued to progress through the model runs here, is that warm sector is pushing a little bit further towards the north here. We're starting to get more of those 70s pushing into central Alabama here, the Mississippi Delta, even southern Georgia starting to get into the action. Atlanta's going to try to even push 60 here before all is said and done. So, like I said, all these areas that I'm watching for severe weather could make it all the way as far north as Atlanta, and then maybe all the way down towards the Gulf Coast here. But it really depends, again, on how that warm sector advances. If we get advection more towards the north, we get greater, I think we'll get more action there. Because it seems like the short waves are a little bit further to the north as well, which is a good point of lift, which is another key factor you would need for severe weather. Now, the thing is, like I said before, GFS is painting a slightly different picture, especially as we go further into range here. But we're going to go towards the 12th, which showed, I would say, a little bit better potential, but the warm sector doesn't seem to be quite as abundant here. So, like I said, a lot of questions still remain with this at this point, but I think somewhere along the Gulf Coast and between the Mississippi Delta seems to be the point of interest still right now. Just seems like everything's trying to come together towards these regions here. Then, of course, we go further along. Here's where that cold air comes into play here. Like I said, I really think the Ohio Valley is going to be a point of interest. Towards the deep south, we might have a day or two where it gets pretty cold, and then just like that, we're warming right back up. But again, has that look of a very dynamic month where we're going to be kind of flipping back and forth towards the middle to late part of the month. And just for good measure, we'll look at the euro in comparison, which has been freezing a lot. I'm trying to figure out why that keeps happening. But in any case, though, you can see we have some really crazy extremes here. That gradient that we saw there with this frontal boundary that comes in as well, that's kind of got a concerning look to it, because that could be some crazy, and I mean crazy weather. And then on the back side of that, we have some pretty crazy extremes to go with it. We go from 75 over here towards Birmingham all the way to 31 within the course of 24 hours. So even if you don't get winter weather in the deep south, this rapid change in temperatures could mess with your immunity here. So again, always make sure that you are watching your health here. But as we continue to go further along, it seems like the euro wants to keep the trend a little bit colder for, I guess, longer in this. I guess you could say a little bit longer. So an extensive period of cold could be possible depending on this outcome. But eventually, as I mentioned before, we do start to warm back up towards the very end. So looking in the mid to long range here, brace yourselves, because cold air is coming. Just how significant is still the main question that we have at this point. We'll be making more videos in the future to get a little bit more in depth with that. But another thing that we're going to be looking at, of course, is the dew points. That's going to be mainly for the severe weather threat. Usually when we have cold air coming in, dew points are going to drop off. When we have severe weather potential, that's when we're going to see these 6-degree plus dew points here. So we're going to make our comparison here. We have the GFS, we have the euro here on the 10th, heading into the 11th. Like I said, the moist sector even looks better here than I'm sure it will on the GFS. And this is right around where I would say peak time or peak potential would be for storm development. And as you can see over towards the Mississippi Delta, we're nearing 70-degree dew points here. As we look over towards central and northern Birmingham, we're getting into those 60-degree dew points, 60 plus 65-degree dew points towards south central Georgia as well. Now in GFS, however, like I said, it really seems more like the warm and the moist sector just doesn't really seem to be quite as abundant. I mean, we do have some patches here and there. It's by the time we get into the 11th, but towards peak time frame here, I think really the threat looks to be a bit more mitigated towards the Gulf Coast at this point. But we'll have to see how things pan out from that point. And we have a sneaky little frontal boundary that tries to pop up here towards the very end as well, which we'll have to keep an eye on as we get towards the 12th and the 13th as well. So a lot of model disagreement here, a lot of questions to be had there. One thing that I'm also keeping an eye on here, and we kind of jumped to this earlier on, is we were looking at the signals for convective available potential energy, or CAPE. And one little common denominator that I've found between the two maps here, both on GFS and Euro, is a lot of the instability seems to be showing strongest over towards the Gulf Coast right now. I'm still questioning whether we'll see an uptick in CAPE signals over here towards the Delta here and parts of the southeastern U.S. states here. But right now it's a bit questionable at this point. But like I said, this only helps to increase my confidence that there is going to be a chance for some severe weather. Now, will everything come together perfectly? Still a big question at this point, but definitely something that is an eye catcher for me for sure. Now, as we go to the precipitation maps here, This is where things get a little bit more complicated. So we'll go with the Euro here first, actually. So make sure you're watching towards the bottom left corner of your screen. Here's ice storm number 1. And then we have ice storm number 2. A nice little line of showers that pops up towards the deep south. All while in the meanwhile, out towards the west, snow is relatively light starting out. So we get towards the 12th, 11th, and into the 12th and beyond. Here's our low pressure system here. This is where our severe weather potential starts to increase a bit here. And really at this point, convective mode kind of leans into mostly I would say a line of storms, but there are some areas where we could get more scattered activity. If conditions do become more favorable, I do think prefrontal cells, maybe even a couple of supercells could be possible with this, but at this point in time, you can throw certainty out of the window. All while in the meanwhile, over towards the mid-Atlantic and the northeast here, and this is actually a pretty strong low pressure here. I almost would say this has a nor'easter look to it. This would probably become a big factor in regards to some snow there. Some notable accumulations would be possible at this point here. Now, by the time we get towards the end of that 1 week run here, we're going to switch over to the GFS now. And here's ice storm number 1. Here's our mountain snow system. And this is where the totals are a little bit more aggressive out towards the northwest. And then before we know it, this storm has made its way across the Midwest, heading into the Northeast. This is ice storm number 2. Then after that point, we get a little clipper system that comes in towards the Northeast, kind of lingers a bit. So we have a little bit of snow heading into the Appalachians here and into the Mid-Atlantic. By the time we get towards the 11th and beyond here, we have a couple of different systems come in. This one towards the 12th looks a little bit more notable. And then on the north side of that cold, where the cold air lingers, this is where we see some cold air damming, and yet another ice storm looks to be possible at this point as we go further along here. Now, once we go beyond that point here, most of the winter weather activity looks like it stays towards the north all the way up until the 17th and 18th. This would be a big deal if this were to occur. Not only is this an ice storm, but look at how wide spanning this is. It's widespread ice all the way from the northeast coast towards New York City, all the way towards Dallas. That is a crazy look right there if that ends up occurring. It's absolute madness at this point. And then right on top of that, it could be thunder ice based off of this look here, because we have an incredibly strong surface low here at 994 millibars. You can actually see a huge line of thunderstorms preceding the line of ice, and then also significant snowfall also being possible over towards the Ohio Valley at this point. Now, again, like I said, this is where things kind of get a bit wacky here, because if we were to switch back over to the GFS, this signal does not pop up at all. So, like I said, a lot of confusion as to what happens next with this. But in either case, though, after that point, looks like winter weather is still going to be a big factor here. But the timing of this system is far different here, because when we get to 3:30 hours here, I'm thinking that the system that's showing up here is all the way back over here towards the northwest here. So big time mountain snow in this case for the Euro, whereas the GFS moves this from Canada all the way down through the Midwest and into the Northeast and Ohio valleys as well. And then we watch that move out. By the time we get towards the end of this model run, we have another snowstorm setting up for the north and also I would say the Midwest at this point. So like I said, tale of two models here. Let the madness begin. Who's gonna get what? Time will only tell. Well, last things that we're gonna do here, and I normally don't do this, but I'm gonna be making a snowfall depth comparison here. So this is the chance of snowfall. This is not going over the chance of snowfall. These are where we're likely to get snow. We're looking at totals here. And what you'll notice with the blend of models here, you'll see that big bullseye exists over towards the northeast. Not really surprised at this point. This setup is very much a conducive one for that region here. Also towards the Midwest here, going to be plenty of action here and there. There's going to be some spots where we get a little bit lighter totals here, especially over towards central parts of Illinois here. And then over towards maybe, I would say, far northern North Dakota, which is a bit surprising, but given the storm track, really not. But in any case, though, looks like over towards the anywhere east of the Rockies here, we have pretty good chances of snow until you get into the deep south. But even places like Oklahoma City aren't exempt. Amarillo, you could even get an inch over the course of the next 10 days. And then, of course, as we go towards the Rockies, this area, this mountain range is going to get slammed. Where the big winner really seems like it's going to be over towards the Sierras, where even in some spots we could get up to 100 inches of snow within the next 10 days, which is crazy. Now, obviously, when we look at some of these other models here, totals are going to vary. National Weather Service blend of models is actually a happy medium between all the models here. Euro here is actually a little less aggressive with the snow than what I would anticipate in regards to accumulation, but we'll have to see how things pan out with that. But some bullseyes again, northeast. A little bit of a bullseye has started to pop up over here towards the mid-Atlantic. Over towards the Midwest here has also got a pretty big bullseye, especially over between the Kansas-Nebraska line, where up to potentially or even exceeding 10 inches of snow is possible here. Of course, towards the mountains, it's pretty much the same old song and dance, although the totals are not quite as significant. If we go over towards the Canadian model has a big snow hole over here towards the Midwest here and also into the southern plains, but also brings that snow line a little bit further to the south here. So that's a pretty interesting scenario that pops up here. GFS is a little bit more in comparison, is a little bit more similar in comparison to the Euro there. If we were to go ahead and look at our snow depth by the time we get into the 15-day range here. Now, we don't normally use a CFS. I don't find it to be the most reliable long-range model, unless it's the only model at that point. And at that point, we're not necessarily making a forecast. We're looking more so for a trend here. But this is pretty crazy over here, over towards the northeast, where a foot plus of snow and snow depth is possible. Over towards the Midwest here and the northern plains here, we could potentially see up to 2 feet here. Not sure if I agree with this right here by the time all is said and done. Over towards the Rockies here, I think the totals are going to be much higher than that, and this is kind of what I'm talking about. As we go to the Euro here, look how abundant the totals get at this point. It's been snowing here a lot, so it's not all that surprising to see potential for 6 feet plus of snow or more. But really, I'm kind of surprised to see that the Sierras here aren't seeing as much in the way of snow depth by the end of this here. It doesn't really look like we're going to have too great of a warm-up here over towards the west at this point. We're predominantly in a negative P&A pattern where out towards the west it's going to be cooler than average, and I expect that to continue here. So a little surprised to see that on the Euro here, but pretty much everything else is relatively the same here. The totals are going to be bullseye for the totals outside of the Rockies, mainly going to be over towards the northeast. Ohio Valley kind of pops up over here on snow depth, and then also towards parts of the Midwest we could get an increase in action there. GFS, it's a little bit more aggressive, but the snow depths stay greatest over towards the northern half of the country. Not surprising given all the parameters we talked about in the February outlook. But in any case, though, same thing actually over for the Sierras here. Does look like even though we could expect up to 100 inches of snow depending on the model run here, it's looking like the Sierras here just don't get quite as much. 41 inches is still plenty though, and this is going to help for a lot of these areas over here, because over towards California, the main source of water is actually over here towards these mountains, which is good news. But the total snow depth that we see over here towards the northeast, especially over towards the mountain ranges here, that's pretty impressive here to say the least. 3 feet of snow depth possible here is really something. But in any case though, it does look like we're going to be dealing with a lot in the way of winter weather. Severe potential is going to be heightened, so a lot to keep track of here. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button to get that notification bell on, to make sure you get that next video. We're probably going to be live tonight in a few hours to prepare for our first winter storm and ice storm. Probably gonna have a nice little chain of them from the looks of it here. Sorry if this is bad news to any of you, but hey, sometimes that's just how it goes with the weather. But stay tuned, and I'll see you guys a little bit later. Until then, take care and have an awesome rest of your day.